Both Denton and Selden were almost equal on how they approached the issues. The big difference and the deciding factor in this election was their campaign techniques. It was Denton's first time running for public office, and he ran a very conservative campaign, stressing a strong traditional family unit and good moral values. He carried the support of several evangelical groups and the moral majority. Selden's campaign dealt more with his experience as a former congressman and U.S. ambassador. His Montgomery County campaign chairman, Jess Griffin, attributes Denton's landslide victory to the fact that Selden's campaign misread the effect of Denton's patriotism on the voters, as well as his campaign based on moral values. Last night, Selden told his campaign staff that he doesn't plan to seek any political office in the future. The former congressman phoned Denton to congratulate him, saying he would give the former Vietnam POW his full support. But Selden has not said how active he'll be in the campaign against the Democratic nominee. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Yeah, the rest of them work in Birmingham, I think. Honestly, going to the mountains. Well, we plan to have just an intensive campaign as we can have. We plan to be in as many counties as we can, if not all of them. We plan to be organizing on the county level. That good grassroots politics has proven successful for us so far. We'll continue to pursue that and continue to work 18 hours a day and address issues head on to hopefully win this race.
One last question. Do you think being the son of a former governor was an advantage for your campaign?
Well, of course, I acknowledge that my father was a great man, and I'm very proud of my father and his accomplishments throughout his life, but I would like to state, and I think people know that I feel I'm my own man, and I hope to be making my own record and to accomplish the things that I can accomplish for the state of Alabama.
Simply put, the rule of grand jury secrecy was applied to the Bremer diary case today. Only a grand jury indictment or a specific court order could now free the government to release information. Federal prosecutor Russell Baker, who originally subpoenaed the diary, promised to return the original and all copies to Sherman Griffin after a full review. Baker told Judge Frank Kaufman he asked to check the diary to make sure Arthur Bremer acted alone when he plotted to kill George Wallace in 1972. Baker said there was nothing to indicate anyone else was involved in another section of the diary found shortly after the assassination attempt, but all leads, he said, had to be followed. Griffin, who made the most recent find, claimed ownership under Wisconsin law and hoped to capitalize on Bremer's notoriety by publishing the work. He feared disclosure elsewhere would upstage him. The agreement today appears to have paved his way. But notably, Arthur Bremer's attorney, Benjamin Lipsitz, was in the courtroom. There had been speculation that Bremer, who was serving time in a Maryland prison, might challenge Griffin's claim of ownership, or at least demand some royalties. Lipsitz made no such official challenge today. Griffin's attorneys have retained a copy of the diary. Margaret Shield did confirm that in it Bremer pledged to kill Richard Nixon, but she made no other reference to content.
The original, by the rules, will be returned to us and the copies will be destroyed. Then it's a question of ownership.
There was nothing said in court today to prevent Sherman Griffin from publishing the diary before a grand jury review is complete. But several details may have to be worked out depending on the nature of an Arthur Bremer challenge. I did overhear his attorney say to Griffin's lawyer, "I'll certainly be giving you a call, and soon."
Representative Jack Venable of Tallahassee says he resents the use of low-interest industrial development revenue bonds, allowing similar businesses to set up next door to each other. Venable is one of several businessmen, attorneys, and developers appearing before an Alabama Securities Commission and State Industrial Revenue Bond Advisory Council public hearing on the expanded use of the tax-free bonds. Some claim the use of these bonds for business and not for industry only is a violation of the original intent of the Wallace-Cater Act. State ADO Director Reuben Feeney says the bonds are part of a package used to attract industry to the state. The Commission and Council is being asked to allow the use of the tax-exempt bonds for establishing businesses. Some contend it pits retailers against each other, such as those financed through private sources and at higher interest rates. A group of retailers, merchants, and developers say 26 states use industrial development bonds for commercial purposes. The Alabama legislature may have to spell out the intent of the Wallace-Cater Act. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Saturday marks the 48th meeting between Georgia Tech and Alabama. Tide preparations for this year's clash have been hampered by the extreme August heat, says Alabama head coach Paul Bear Bryant. Coach Bryant says there have been more injuries that have been slower to heal, and the players have found it harder to concentrate, all due to the 90-degree-plus temperatures. Coach Bryant hopes his troops will be ready for what promises to be a very upset-minded Georgia Tech team.
Should be. They know the game schedule. The team's going to have on a different colored jersey. Their competitors, they'll be ready to play.
When I talked to you last, it was press day, and I asked you about the offensive line, which was about the only real question mark anyone had about Alabama this year. And you said it was a little too early to tell about them. Have you seen any signs during practice? You ready to comment on the rebuilding of the line?
Well, I've been disappointed. We haven't made nearly as much progress I'd hoped to make by now. I'd hoped to have some linemen out there knocking people out of those trenches and with consistency, and we don't have that. We don't have explosive speed. We don't have the quickness, and we must have. Well, we're going to do that.
So Alabama was ranked second in both AP and UPI. How do you feel about the poll situation?
Well, I don't think that it would make any difference to me. If we had to play today, we wouldn't be in the top 20. I can tell you that.
What's the most important game you'll play this year, Coach?
Georgia Tech.
What's the second most important game?
Mississippi.
I accept this chairmanship and pledge to you that Montgomery County will be in your column on November the 4th.
Bring victory on November the 4th. Now, I'll tell you something, when you start looking for...
First of all, I wish he hadn't said it. Second, he did apologize. Third, I don't think it was the way I heard him. He didn't say the state of Alabama nor the South, and I think it was an inadvertent slip of the tongue. Many people make those all the time. A fellow this president called, when he was trying to think of Hubert Humphrey's name the other night at the convention, called him Hubert Horatio Hornblower.
You notice that guy was pushing the bicycle, not riding. Oh. I think that might be the wisest man in the entire colony.
Why do you suppose the bank tellers and the hotel concierge and the gas station, why did they wear clothes?
I have no idea, but it did occur to me that it's a reverse on the old ploy, taking a look at some of those shapes out there. You know, when you're at a beach, sometimes people would suggest that you mentally undress that woman. Taking a look at some of those figures, I can see where you would mentally dress one or two of those people who were walking along as well. We'll be back after this message.
The fruit and vegetable canning facility has been open about 2 months. It was built with $750,000 of revenue-sharing money granted by the governor. Fruits and vegetables grown at state prisons are brought here for processing and then sent back to other facilities for consumption. Combined with the prison slaughterhouse and a dairy that's in the planning stages, officials hope the state's prisons will produce 70% of the inmates' food. The head of Food Services says the prisons have produced more than $500,000 worth of food in the past 8 months. He says he wants taxpayers to know that the prisons are working to save millions of dollars through the food program. Governor James expressed his approval, remarking on the sanitation. He says he hopes to have more such projects in prisons across the state. An added benefit to the canning and freezing and meat plants is that they provide training for the inmates. A prisoner who learns to be a butcher can earn $7 an hour in a packing plant outside the prison. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at Staten Correctional Facility.
We have been successful in our last 12 endeavors in the campaign. And it's no small part that you play in making those successes.
Campaign Chairman Todd Strange says this year's goal of reaching and even surpassing the $2 million plus mark hopefully will be met by November 1st, the target date for the campaign. Strange says the 2,000 volunteers from the Montgomery, Autauga, and Elmore County United Way chapters begin their solicitation efforts later this month, hoping the doors they knock on will help them touch the lives of some very special people. He says the workers will reach over 100,000 people through the United Way agencies. This year's United Way poster child is 7-year-old Ginger Stewart. She's one of many handicapped youngsters, like the ones at the Children's Center in Montgomery, born with defects ranging from blindness and deafness to cerebral palsy, who have received special care and schooling, all made possible with the help of those who gave the United Way. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
A telegram from Ronald Reagan and read by State Republican Party co-chairman Ray Scott says Reagan is delighted with Fulmer's decision to be county chairman for the Reagan-Bush Campaign 80. Fulmer says he realizes he's putting his political future on the line, but he says the country is in danger through neglect and he's responding. He says the people of the country are fed up with non-leadership and it's time for Americans to start acting like Americans again. Fulmer says he doesn't think Reagan's recent endorsement by the Ku Klux Klan is a factor to discuss because it was not designed to help. He says he welcomes the support from any who want to help Reagan, including the moral majority.
The moral majority, I think, is made up of wonderful people. They are concerned about the direction of this country, about the way it's headed, and I welcome their support just as I welcome everybody who wants to vote for Mr. Ronald Reagan.
Fulmer says he will do everything he can to elect Admiral Denton to the U.S. Senate and to re-elect Congressman Dickinson. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Officials with Pinehurst Airlines say Montgomery is one of several cities in the South where they're considering providing air passenger service. The airline's board of directors has decided to go back into the passenger business after 8 years as a freight carrier. Airport Director Kim Yu says nothing's definite at this point, but they've talked about service from Montgomery to Atlanta and possibly Panama City and New Orleans. He says that service is tentatively planned to start on March 1st, with Republic Airlines providing all passenger handling and terminal facilities. Pinehurst has ordered several 60-passenger YS-11 turboprop planes to be delivered sometime next spring. Pinehurst Carter Burwell III says the planes are designed to serve areas where jets are uneconomical. He says a representative from his company will discuss the specifics with airport authority officials within the next 30 days, and a decision should be made soon afterwards. Burwell says one deciding factor will be how much support they can get from the Montgomery community. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The National Guard is marching on the students again, only this time there are blanks in their guns and cameras pointed at them. The controversy over what happened on May 4th, 1970 hovers around this NBC movie. First, Ohio wouldn't let the production be filmed on the college campus, so it had to be moved to Alabama.
Kent State University is a very average-looking campus, so when Hollywood was refused permission to film there, the producers found Gadsden State Junior College, which has the rolling landscape and buildings remarkably like Kent State.
Several of the original National Guardsmen at Kent State are playing extras in the background, helping the production keep its objectivity. One of those guardsmen, still active, has been threatened with being drummed out of the military for helping with the movie. All of this is based on the fear that the film will show Ohio officials and the National Guard in a bad light. Professor Greg Payne has made a careful study of the Kent State incident. By using a collection of news photographs taken during the confrontation, it is his job to make sure everything is accurate.
What we've tried to do here is make a factual representation of what occurred. We are not trying to take sides, we're just trying to present the facts as they are and allow the audience to make their own decisions.
The 4-hour, 2-part NBC movie scheduled for January may not end there. The show's producer is hopeful that the story can be boiled down into a 2-hour production and shown in European theaters.
This is the property where Alabama Power wants to build its new substation. It's right off the Eastern Bypass and the Atlanta Highway, but it's also next to a residential area. Power company officials say there's a need for a substation because of the growth in the area.
They've told us also that this is the only available piece of property for that substation, and this is where we disagree. We know of several locations in the same area to be served that would not be near a residential area, and it would not affect the value of our homes and would not affect our community and possibly the safety of the children.
Power company officials say they've investigated other sites, but this one in Carroll Villa is the only one available. They say it's near existing power lines, and building the substation here will hold down the costs.
We're not fighting these people. We must have a substation to continue to provide service in that area. And if we can't put it there, we'll find a place somewhere else. Anywhere else is likely to be more expensive, and that will get back in the long run to the customers.
Members of the Carroll Villa Civic Association have 700 names on petitions asking the Board of Adjustments not to allow Alabama Power to build on the property. They say they'll show up in full force at the meeting September 8th, and they'll fight Alabama Power all the way. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Alabama State coach George James has not beaten Jackson State in the 4 years that he has been head coach of the Hornets. Jackson State holds an 8-1 series advantage. The last time Alabama State won way back in 1911. So the Hornets have something to prove. When Crampton Bowl comes alive under the lights Saturday night, ASU will unveil a new offense, the Veer. And the Hornets have some experienced people to make that new offense work. ASU's backfield of junior quarterback John Caldwell, junior halfback Dietrich Massengale, and sophomore fullback Quentin Jones returns intact. Caldwell is the key to the Veer offense.
I think it's going to be very good to us, because, all the quarterbacks can run, gives us a chance to change the plays at the line. It gives to do a whole lot, You
like it better than the eye, then?
Yeah, a whole lot better, because, we can change the play at the line and call quick pass plays, down and out, stuff like that.
Jackson State will display a running game that has led the Southwestern Athletic Conference the past 3 years. ASU's defense faces a tough task.
You got to really control the passing game, got to control the running game, which is a hard thing to do against Jackson when they're all that potent type of offense.
There's one thing that the Alabama State Hornets will have to their advantage, the memory of Joseph Pettis, a defensive back who died of a freak injury in spring practice. The Alabama State team has dedicated the entire season to the memory of Joseph Pettis. That dedication may just be enough to carry Alabama State past Jackson State Saturday night at Crampton Bowl. From Hornet Stadium on the campus of Alabama State University, Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Late yesterday afternoon, 2 employees of the glass company were sent down inside a 75 to 80-foot high silo to shovel the gypsum around so that it would flow more easily onto a conveyor system leading into the factory. The men had to go down 54 feet into the silo to do their work since the supply of gypsum was low. Police say their investigation showed the men had finished and were beginning the long climb up a ladder to get out. One man, Crum Bates Jr., was about halfway up the ladder when he says he heard a thump, turned, and found that the gypsum collected along the walls of the silo had broken loose and buried 31-year-old James Donald Harris under about 7 feet of the white powdery substance. It took rescuers about an hour to dig the body out. Police say their investigation shows that company safety policies were not violated, and the incident is being ruled an industrial accident. The police, however, say that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, will conduct its own investigation into the incident. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
When Tuskegee Institute celebrates its centennial year in 1981, it will also commemorate the retirement of its fourth president, Dr. Luther H. Foster.
All of those
Foster has been the Tuskegee chief for 39 years, succeeding presidents Booker T. Washington, Robert Moton, and Fred Patterson. He says history will tell of his accomplishments as president of the Black Institution, but he says he leaves with several expansions of the college's programs, namely the increase in student body, the new facilities for the engineering and veterinary programs, and the new Job Corps program. Foster says if the founder of the college were to revisit the campus today, he would be quite pleased.
I think he would be happy that there is confirmation of his view of what the central mission of the Institute was when he established it in 1881, and that central mission has not changed, which is a concern for the dignity of people, for service, and for quality, and for equity for persons generally in the society.
Dr. Foster says he doesn't know who the next president will be, and he says he'll work informally with the college, but in no official capacity after his retirement. The 96th commencement address will be delivered by Dr. Foster. He says it will be an honor to stand before the student body, speaking words of wisdom and saying goodbye. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, on the campus of Tuskegee Institute.
Governor James says education is a top priority. That's why he's accepted an invitation from the Alabama Education Association to find out what it's like in the classroom firsthand.
I have received lots of coaching in preparation over the last 2 or 3 weeks. They tell me that I'm not quite ready or qualified yet, but if I study this entire weekend, all weekend, that I will be conditioned to carry the load for 3 days in a 3rd grade class in a school in Jefferson County starting this coming Monday. I think it's very important, as I have said many times before, that we build as a pyramid from the base up, putting great emphasis on K through 6, and of course strong emphasis all through our 2-year and 4-year colleges.
The governor says the state has made great strides in improving the quality of education, but the ultimate success depends on the public at large. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The Public Service Commission staff recommended 3 auditing firms from 7 who submitted bids. Samford says he wants an outside firm to audit the power company because he says the PSC staff workload is too heavy to audit the fuel adjustment clause. Plus, Samford thinks the staff will learn from an auditing firm with experience in this type of work. The 3 firms chosen for further consideration submitted bids varying from $25,000 for 300 hours of work to $113,000 for 900 man-hours. Both Samford and Commissioner Pete Matthews expressed concern about the discrepancy in hours and will meet with representatives of the 3 firms next week. Samford says he wants the audit completed by the middle of December. He says he believes the fuel adjustment clause should be changed so that some company expenses aren't passed directly to the consumer each month. He says it could be that the adjustment factor should be eliminated altogether, and he wants to be in on that decision before he leaves office early next year. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
It was to be used to cool people off, fans and things of that nature. When we got it, let me say, as usual, Alvin has his facts mixed up. We received that money in late August. It was to be used to cool people off, fans and things of that nature. When we got it, the summer was nearly over. It turned out on a federal and national level to be a tremendous boondoggle. And that money will be used at a later date in a constructive sense to try to help with the energy cost in one form, fashion, or the other.
Time trials, qualifying races, a special 30-lap limited sportsman feature, and a 20-lap bomber feature headline the racing schedule tonight. Tomorrow night, a 25-lap consolation and the Rich All-Pro 200. several big names from NASCAR's Grand National Circuit racing at MIS this weekend, including the Silver Fox, David Pearson, and a late entry, Donnie Allison. For Allison, the All-Pro 200 will be a family affair.
Well, yeah, Bobby's boy Davey, of course, is going to run the limited race tonight and then the modified race tomorrow night. And my son been talking about trying out that limited, but I don't know if his mother's going to let him do that or not.
How about the short track racing, both of you for that matter? How does it differ from the bigger track?
Well, on short tracks here, there's not really any strategy to it. You have to run as hard as you can, you know, for 200 laps. And of course, on the super speedways, 500 miles, you don't run wide open for all 500 miles. Of course, I had 2 last weekend because I got 2 laps behind right off the bat, and I had to make them up. But I'm not done it. This is the fun type racing here, and of course, I do the other part for the business end of it.
Other entries include Red Farmer, who has a long history at MIS, another Grand National driver, Rick Wilson, Ronnie Sanders, and more. Quite a weekend of racing and quite an experience today for photographer Bill Sham, who toured the Speedway in Mike Alexander's car. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
The Montgomery Census Office was in charge of 15 counties in southeast Alabama. District Manager Joan Bowen says overall the program went very well, but says there were a few problems, like the need for more time in handling the project.
There were several significant points at which we simply needed more time to handle it effectively, to go back and go over some of the work that had been previously done and ensure its accuracy. Because we did not have enough time at some points between our operations, we caused work that had to later go back, that we had to later go back and clean up.
Bowen says her office has stayed open 3 weeks beyond the originally scheduled closing date, which has also been necessary nationwide. She says, like other district managers throughout the country, she'll present this and other suggestions to the regional office. Bowen says one strong point was the cooperation gained from local officials at the city and county levels. She says many of them got involved in each step of the project by reviewing preliminary counts and offering suggestions where there might have been problems. She says another strong point was the census staff, who learned quickly and did a very good job, despite the fact that very few of them had worked with the census before. Within the next 3 to 4 weeks, local, county, and state officials will get a final preliminary count of population and housing units. Bowen says a more detailed report will be presented to the President on January 1st, and a copy of that will be presented to each state's legislature by April 1st. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Oh, you want to start this walk over?
Several Montgomery radio stations are involved with the blood drive and are urging their listeners to come by the Red Cross building on South Ripley Street to donate a pint of blood. Red Cross officials have set a quota of 200 pints during the weekend drive.
We try to do it twice a year, every 6 months, and we had the last one in January, and we waited until right after the Labor Day holiday because of the need for blood during this time of the year, Dan. Our supplies are down due to the Labor Day holiday.
Mrs. Folsom says the donor process only takes a few minutes and adds that anyone between the age of 18 and 65 can give blood. The blood drive continues tomorrow from 1 to 5. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Georgia Tech punter Jeff Pierce bobbled a snap to set up Alabama's first score. The Tide recovered the ball at the 10-yard line with just 4 minutes gone in the first quarter. Alabama struck quickly on the turnover. Billy Jackson, star of the 1980 Sugar Bowl, picked up where he left off, running the 10 yards for the touchdown, standing up. Early second quarter, Jackson again capping a penalty-aided 50-yard drive, running the final 5 for the score. Peter Kim's point after was wide, Alabama 13-0. Then just before intermission, Tide sprint star James Mallard got behind the Tech secondary and scored 6 the first time he touched the ball for Alabama. Don Jacobs delivered the 39-yard bomb. Alabama was unable to score in the third quarter, but the Tide defense never let Tech into the game. From 1st and goal at the 3, they swarmed quarterback Mike Kelly on 3rd down after 2 inside plays failed completely. Tech was able to get 1 field goal out of 3 second-half drives. Alabama mounted an Allen Gray-led 80-yard drive late in the fourth quarter to make the final Alabama 26, Georgia Tech 3, moving Bear Bryant 18 wins short of Amos Alonzo Stagg's all-time record. This is Phil Snow reporting from Birmingham's Legion Field.
As we have for so many years solved other problems, we will solve our economic problem, we will solve our political problems and our ecological problems, and to paraphrase what I said in the beginning, of our troubles, no citizen of America should despair.
Judge Johnson outlined 4 basic rights which he says are what's right with America today. He says the first one is the right to safety and security of individuals. He says freedom can only exist where citizens are secured against bondage, lawless violence, and arbitrary arrest and punishment. Judge Johnson says in order for citizens to be free, they must be subject to discipline, but says any punishment must be conducted in a civilized fashion. The second basic right is that of citizenship and its privileges. He says every mature and responsible person must be able to enjoy full citizenship and have an equal voice in government. Judge Johnson says the third basic right is that of freedom of conscience and expression, and the fourth is right of equality and opportunity. He says it's not enough to have freedom of expression, but citizens must also be able to enjoy the benefits of society and opportunity to contribute to its progress. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Looking back, 1979 was a very educational year in the NFL. For instance, we learned from Walter Payton how to stand on your head in the end zone. The Philadelphia Eagles offensive line taught us how not to block the Dallas front four. Members of the Dallas D showed us what professional piggyback riding is all about. One San Francisco 49er preferred the end zone crawl, the latest craze on the West Coast. The Cardinals and Redskins teamed up to show us how to fumble a football in 7 easy steps. Some of the Philadelphia Eagles were blessed with hands that even Madge couldn't help. The miraculous miscues continued in New England. Despite all the problems, the Buffalo Bills taught us what teamwork is all about. So did the Patriots. The NFL players managed to keep their sense of humor, and while most fans have turned their thoughts towards the new season that begins on Sunday, others simply could care less.
My thoughts on the jail situation is I hope they don't spend that $8 million before I get down there and try to use it to address some of the serious problems over here too.
Does this mean that you think that the jail shouldn't take as high of a priority, or what?
I don't think the jail should take as high a priority perhaps as they're giving it. I think that I'm against, at this point, I'm against building a new jail. I'm for perhaps expanding the existing jail. I don't know how much study has been given to that, but I'm against building a new jail at this point because there are too many other needs in the community, human needs.
One of the problems that we've heard a lot about, particularly in the voting yesterday, was the problem that when the voters got to the polls, they wanted to throw a few votes Democratic, a few votes Republican, and they couldn't, and they were upset about it. What about this problem, and what other problems did you run into in yesterday's voting?
Well, that problem comes up every time we have a primary election. Part of the reason for its emergence, I think, is because Alabama has been traditionally a one-party state. Most people have been accustomed to being Democrats and voting in the Democratic primary, and then in the general election voting from whomever they want. But the real purpose of a primary is for members of a political party, either the Democratic or Republican or the Conservative Party, to come together and to select people who best represent the principles that that political party is based on. And those, of course, those nominees of those political parties, which are selected in the primary, then face each other and independents in the general election. So political party primaries are legally restricted to only those people who believe in the principles of the political party in whose primary they seek to participate.
One thing that I've heard a lot about since yesterday is the question of voter declaration. People would go in and say, well, I know what I'm going to vote, I know which party I'm in, but I don't particularly want to announce that going in. Of course, the first thing they were asked to do is to sign up either Republican or Democrat. Is there any way around that?
There really isn't. You can be a Democrat or you can be a Republican, but you can't be both at the same time. So in order for the election officials to know which ballot to give you or which voting machine to send you into, that election official has to ask of the voter whether or not they are Democrats or Republicans. Otherwise, there'd be no way for them to know whether to give the person a Democratic or a Republican ballot.
Couldn't the machines be arranged, though, so that once you had pulled the trigger, say, on the Democratic side on any race, it automatically locked out the Republican side or vice versa?
Well, we're dealing with voting machines that were designed in the 1920s and 1930s, and very few refinements have been made to them since. The complaint that you have raised, the issue that you have raised, is only one of the deficiencies of Alabama's voting machines. Some of the new technology that's used in other states, some of the newer automatic tabulating voting equipment that's used in Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, or Georgia, for instance, could better accommodate and solve those problems. Not only would they produce a In addition, they would produce a faster and perhaps a more accurate vote return.
Do you see any hope in the foreseeable future of correcting the problem with the machines? Can the machines be replaced? What can be done there?
Right now, we have an election law that limits competition to only two types of voting equipment companies. What I have sought to do as Secretary of State is to have legislation introduced that would bust this monopoly, that would open competition and let the free marketplace determine what voting equipment is offered to the counties for purchase. And then over a period of time, after we've seen the various types of equipment on display, and after they've been tested, and after some counties have used those different types and newer types of voting equipment, then perhaps the state would want to make a commitment to buy a uniform type of equipment. But right now, I think it's appropriate that we bust this monopoly and open competition up so that the newer types of voting equipment companies can come into Alabama and offer those.
Can you put any kind of time frame on how long this might take for this?
Well, there's some large counties like Jefferson County that wants to buy new equipment now. We expect to offer this legislation in the next session of the legislature, and hopefully it will be passed so that Jefferson County won't be forced to buy the same type of voting equipment. Right.
During the 1978 race, when you were running for Secretary of State, one of the hot issues was the question of election reform. How do you feel you've done since you've been in office, and what kind of changes have you made or do you see making in the near future?
Well, we've made a substantial effort to bring to the attention of the members of the House and Senate and to the general public some of the deficiencies in Alabama's election laws. Most of our election laws were written in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and very few changes have been made since. As soon as I was elected, I appointed an election law commission. We had 14 regional meetings. Over 1,700 people attended those meetings, and we accumulated a list of problems and proposed solutions to elections problems. From that, we studied it and we drafted legislation very carefully. We have offered that legislation to the legislature in the last two sessions. The problems that we addressed were those that needed attention as quickly as possible. One of the things you mentioned were dead people and duplicates on our voting list. Not only does that continue to cause a problem at the polls because it reflects a degree of inaccuracy that voters feel might carry through to the vote returns. When they see the names of their parents or grandparents still being carried on the voting list, or friends who've moved to out of state 20 years ago still being listed as a registered voter, that doesn't it means that voters sometimes feel that they can't trust the results of the election. If those kinds of things are happening, then they wonder what's happening later after the polls close and whether the election results can really be trusted. We have offered legislation to correct that as well as many other problems, and all I can do as Secretary of State is to study the problems, to offer legislation, and then to do my very best to see that legislation gets a fair hearing in the House and Senate. But I don't have a vote in the House or Senate. So it's up to those people, it's up to the elected representatives to pass this legislation.
Do you see any hope that any meaningful legislation will be passed in the foreseeable future?
I think so. We have two pieces of legislation which have been passed. One which increased the hours that the polls are open, which will mean that people who work for a living will have a better opportunity to be able to vote. And also we've made some substantial reforms in the absentee voting law, which increased the penalties, which did away with the provision that put a double standard on people who were in wheelchairs and who were otherwise handicapped, and also created a provision whereby absentee voters could vote a secret ballot. Prior to this, everybody who voted a secret ballot had to sign his or her own ballot. We were the only state in the country which required a voter to sign an absentee ballot. So we've made some changes which I think make sense, and I just hope that we can convince the House and Senate that these other things are equally as important, and that we can get our voting list cleaned up and get some new voting equipment into the state.
Let's look at the other side of the coin. We've been talking about the people who did vote, who do want to vote. What about the biggest problem, if there could be a biggest problem, has to be voter apathy? Why, and what can be done about that?
I think it's at least twofold. Part of the problem is that people are distrustful, they're cynical, They feel that their vote doesn't make a difference. Why should I bother? Nothing's ever going to change. Nothing's ever going to get better. And what they don't realize is that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that our democratic system provides for change, that we can solve our problems by electing people whom we believe in and trust, and helping to keep those people straight once they get into public office, by ensuring that they follow through with the promises that they made during an election. Nothing's going to change, nothing's going to get better unless we take it upon ourselves to spend a little of our time in politics, the same as we do for our church or civic organizations. What I think is also a part of the problem is that Alabama's voters list are so outdated, they're so filled with dead people and duplicates, that our voter turnout in yesterday's election, while it was recorded at approximately 25%, was probably a considerable percentage higher than that, because we have so many people on our voter registration list that shouldn't be there. Our voter turnout probably was much higher than 25%.
So you're saying maybe the problem isn't as bad as it appears to be then?
Could be, but we won't know until we get our voter list cleaned up and get dead people and duplicates off of them.
The Commission's unanimous approval of the 80-81 budget is almost $2 million more than the county's current budget. There is new revenue from the state's recently imposed 4 cents per gallon gasoline tax. It makes $761,000 available. It's anticipated the county's sales tax will raise $4,115,000 annually. Another $2,190,000 will come from ad valorem taxation. Federal revenue sharing money will provide $979,000. Some of the outstanding expenses include the 7% pay raise for county employees. The largest expense is in engineering, with a budget of $4,342,000. It'll cost about $275,000 more next year to operate the Sheriff's Department, with a budget of $1,612,000. Operation at the county jail is up $100,000 at $858,000. It'll cost just over $500,000 to operate the various functions under the district attorney's office. The Commission refused to approve a $2,000 retroactive expenditure for repairs to a group home shelter care home. George Holy says repairs to a roof needed immediate attention, and he had the work done because the Commission didn't meet last week so he could get approval. The county's attorney says the group home is county property and it's imperative the bid law procedures be followed. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
The official canvass filed with Secretary of State Don Siegelman this morning shows Stewart received 222,540 votes, or 48.6% of the statewide total. He needed a majority of the vote count to win renomination without a runoff. Folsom won a place in the runoff by finishing second with 163,196 votes, or 35.6%. The official Republican canvass shows that Jeremiah Ditton received 73,708 votes, easily defeating his opponent Armistead Selden, who had 41,825 votes. During this morning's official count, the question arose as to whether or not a candidate, either Republican or Democratic, might be able to run as an independent in the November general election. Secretary of State Siegelman addressed the subject.
After 5 p.m., the date of the primary election, it's too late to qualify with the Secretary of State as an independent candidate for any office.
Siegelman says the only way an independent candidate would be allowed to run in the November general election would be as a write-in, and only then if he or she was earlier defeated in the September 2nd primary. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
For residential two-party would increase by 65 cents from $8.60 to $9.25.
So all of our work has been completed.
All of our work is just going to get commission has been completed. The projected cost, you see, we're figuring on projected with those that will actually implement stipulations in order for the tax to be reviewed, which would provide total service to Calhoun County, with the stipulation at this meeting that this commission requires South Central Bell to commence with the installation. Recommend in so doing to review those rates at the time of completion based on the with which these figures have been projected. We simply request that the order that results in the
requiring them to go ahead and furnish this service will give us an opportunity to do the completion of the project.
So all of our work has been completed?
All of our work at this point is commissioned has been completed.
The Women's Club met in the 50-year-old building so they can get an idea of the work that needs to be done, and so they'll be able to see improvements as the project progresses. Fundraisers have already received pledges for $400,000, about a fourth of what's needed for total restoration. Mary Bishop showed the women slides of the Ohio Theater, which took more than $4 million to restore. But that included the purchase price, which isn't an expense with the Paramount since the Troy State Foundation already owns it. Mrs. Bishop says the Paramount has more potential than any theater she's seen, partly because of its proximity to the Whitley Hotel. Work on the Paramount has already begun. The old heating and cooling unit is being removed, the stage curtain has been taken down, and the orchestra pit, once covered by the stage, is exposed. Plans to make the Paramount a viable theater for performers include enlargement of the stage and reworking of the detailed artwork which recalls some of the splendor of the old Paramount. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
And as representatives of the black community, we made some recommendations to them for their consideration. And certainly we were very optimistic about the meeting.
Several residential spokespersons cited 4 major reasons why the power company should not build the substation on the proposed site. They say it will devalue their property, will be a possible safety hazard because of schools in the area, and will cause a noise problem from the generators, and they claim there are other existing sites where a substation can be built. The residents suggested 3 other lots for construction near Alabama Christian College and Wares Ferry Road and next to the Alabama National Bank on the Atlanta Highway. One resident, June Wilburn, who lives next door to the proposed lot, says the property is owned by Wally Johnson, a former power company employee. In his own defense, Johnson says the lot is the most efficient and economical location. Power company officials say although the suggested site was not their first choice, it's near an existing transmission line. The Board of Adjustments will study the matter before any action is taken. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
the wild man. Jackson thinks Mr. Carter has to get a big part of the black vote to be elected, and also Ronald Reagan's initial appeal to black voters has now been found to be superficial. Jackson thinks Mr. Carter has to get a big part of the black vote to be elected, and also he's, quote, the wild man. Jackson thinks Mr. Carter has to get a big part of the black vote to be elected.
Professional and community developers as well are attending the two-day conference. Topics for discussion include oil and gas development in the state, transportation trends, and a presentation on the state of the economy. Ed Pitchford is conference chairman.
We'll be talking about basically two areas. Number one, any changes in the laws and the techniques of industrial development that concern the professional industrial developer, and also the providing of information and techniques for those individuals that want to do something in their community in terms of attracting a new industry to their community.
Pitchford says the main objective of the conference is to sharpen skills and to broaden knowledge of the development process, which will help the state continue economic growth through the 1980s. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Hobbs, in a rare public appearance, says it used to be that many months would pass before some federal cases were brought to trial. But now, he says, Congress mandates a person must be brought to trial within 70 days after the indictment. And Hobbs says the cost of trial preparations can be high.
For the indigent who are provided with lawyers and are allowed to proceed in forma pauperis, or for the very wealthy, these costs may not be insurmountable. But for middle-income Americans, these soaring costs are a tremendous burden. It is a problem that courts do not know how to solve. But judges and legal scholars are properly becoming more and more concerned about this problem. The cost of litigation today encourages payment in some cases which lack merit, almost as though it were blackmail.
Hobbs was appointed to the federal bench last April. The former Montgomery attorney and Selma native says he's enjoying the challenge to make equal justice available to everyone. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.